another episode of Tiny Nest. I'm Kiva.
And I'm Jake. This series is following our tiny house project from the early stages through to completion and beyond.
This episode is part 2 of our interior rooms. After we finished framing the interior rooms, we got the same material as we used for our other walls, 1/4-inch ply, and we cut them to size, including cutting out all of the light switches. And then we got some bargain bin paint and painted the back side just so that everything was sealed, and then on the other side we put a primer. Now that the panels are all primed and sanded, we're ready to put them up. We just put a little shim on the floor so that it's not tight against the floor. And what we're gonna do is measure from the outside wall to the center stud, make a faint pencil mark and use the level so that we know where we're shooting the nails. And we're gonna start from the center and then we'll do the perimeter.
So we ended up with a problem with this piece, basically due to a straight up measuring error. The piece is about 2 inches too short, and rather than discarding the piece because these sheets are like 20 bucks each, we just decided to line up the top end nicely where it's up against the loft joist, because that's going to be highly visible, and made the gap down here because we'll probably just put a thicker piece of trim. And this is also, I'm pretty much right where the fridge is going to be, so this will be mostly hidden. But there is a gap here because it's actually being 2 inches off the ground and the bottom plate being 1.5 inches wide. There's nothing in behind here. So I'm gonna add some blocks back there just as some backing that I can fire a couple nails into, just so that this edge is not completely just free floating here. We wanted a bit of sound deadening for the bathrooms, particularly here, the toilet room, so that you'll have a bit more of a sense of privacy when you're in here doing your business or whatever. So this presented an opportunity to use up some of the tiny little fiddly scraps of leftover Roxol insulation, and I just put strips of masking tape across to hold it in place while I put the panel on, just because they're all tiny little scraps.
We found a use for some of the boards that we painted the wrong side of that were originally for our ceiling. I just put 2 coats of the good white paint over top of the crappy bluish white paint, and we're using them to do 2 sides of our interior toilet room instead of having to buy more of this board. It should be pretty easy. We've pre-cut and painted all the boards and we just are gonna nail them up. The only thing here is that right against the fender here, the boards are a bit shorter, so we're just starting with the board that's full length spanning across, so that way we don't have to notch any pieces.
We're also going to insulate these walls, and it's going to be pretty easy here because we can basically just fill it in, put up 1 or 2 rows, just drop it in, tuck it down, carry on like that. So we're going ahead with that. Right now that we're up to the top board on this wall, I've filled it with insulation and got the wires kind of to where they need to be. And I've also left a little bit of length inside the wall in case we ever need to pull any extra through. And then when it comes to putting the board up, I've got holes drilled to that I'll have to sleeve the wires through so that it'll end up in the right spot when it's up. But also because the wires are here, there's these protection plates everywhere, which is gonna make it hard to nail on. And in the case of the middle one especially, I really need at least one nail down low on the board. So I've actually drilled out a little bit of the protection plate. The wire is actually more like up here. So it's totally safe to put something through right there. And then I've made a tiny little mark. So hopefully I'll be able to get a nail through the board, right through that little spot. And then the other nail will go up above the plate there. Better believe it. Oh joy, the boards we used for the wall here have contracted. So these were the rejects from the ceiling, and we had stored them in like an open air sort of outer shed thing on the side of the house. And so they were in an exterior condition, exposed to the humidity of the outside air, and we took them, measured, cut them, painted them, and did everything like in the garage, and never really had them in the tiny house until we put them up. And we put them up pretty much right away without letting them acclimatize. So just a few days after putting them up, we walked in and started seeing these gaps between some of the boards. And when we had installed them, we of course installed them nice and tight so that it looked clean and finished. And we were not very happy to find out that they had contracted so much so actually that it fully opened up. So we sort of were wondering if we could just leave them, but then we were like, oh god, it looks pretty bad. So I came up with a method of basically pulling off a board down low, or pulling two boards off, putting one back on, then pulling the next board off, putting another one back on, and so on. And so I'll show you the technique I'm using. We're basically having to redo the walls, like the whole walls here. So here's the process sort of in progress. I've got one board out of the way so I can kind of work in here. So I start by I'm gonna pull this out a bit, and these little finishing nails they don't have a lot of holding power, so I can kind of pull it off, and then I've also got a bar to finish it, so I can get it in behind there. And I'm just trying to be pretty gentle, and it's a little bit hard sometimes to make sure I'm not breaking the wood or anything, but I'm just gonna sort of get it off there. And I basically just gotta work it until I can get this board off. And then I've got to get all the little nails out of there. I'm just using these pliers. All right, and then the only thing about this is that I've got two little holes from the original nails out in the center. On the ends, the intention is to have trim that's going to cover those nails anyway. So I'm going to use the little finishing nail gun to put in new nails, and it doesn't matter how many holes or how bad it looks on the edges. But out here in the center, what I'm doing is I've got little 1-inch finishing nails that I'm going to pound in by hand. And they're slightly bigger in diameter than the nails from the gun. So they'll go through the same hole and they'll still get good friction because they're slightly bigger. And then, you know, I'm not making a new hole. Once I've got the seam good and the board held in place with the first nail, I go and do the corners with the nail gun and make sure the corners are good. And then I just finish off by putting another nail in the other hole. And then just sinking them in until the head of the nail's flush with the board with the nail set. Alright, I've finished redoing these boards on both walls. So all the gaps are now closed up. And so it of course meant moving all the pieces down to close up the gaps, and that total amount of all the gaps added together was something like that much, because this board used to be up about there. And so that also means that these wires are poking out, you know, about that much lower, but that's fine. It doesn't really make much of a difference. And also, hopefully, like up here, because there's those protection plates, or there's a plate right here, I had to change where the nails go through, so now there's kind of extra holes, and I did make some marks and stuff, but hopefully we can either touch it up, or there's also going to be a mirror here that's going to cover most of this. So all in all, I'm glad we did it.
If you want to see some of our previous videos, click on the preview tiles. And subscribe if you want to follow our progress. You can also visit our website here. Jacob.
Episode